welcome to the Hobart Commuter. So there was an academic article that recently got some traction in the popular media. It was called Dehumanization of Cyclists Predicts Self-Reported Aggressive Behavior Towards Them. I'll talk about what that means in a minute. But the reason why it got traction in the media, because it had a kind of very interesting Kafka-esque take on the sliding dehumanization style. Now the dehumanization, or not style, scale, is an interesting one. You would have seen it. It's an iconic image of the ascent of man. It kind of shows an ape on his paws, and he gradually evolves through stages into an erect human. Now the idea is, there's some sociological studies that they've done where they use this diagram, and they have participants rate, let's say, ethnic minorities on the scale. Okay, so the more you tend towards registering a particular group or a person towards the ape, then that is apparently there's a correlation between your aggressive behavior or attitude towards that group. Namely, you might be more racist, aggressive towards them, or you'd be more willing to support harsh anti-immigration policies. So the authors of this article had an interesting take on it. Instead of using an ape, they used a cockroach. So they had the cockroach metamorphosizing into the human, and about halfway they had a kind of a cockroachy human figure that looked like those figures out of the alien out of District 9. So the reason behind the cockroach, the use of the cockroach image, is because apparently that's a common invective that's levelled at cyclists. I haven't heard it thrown at me myself, but I can see the similar, see what they were aiming at there. When you're a cyclist, you're kind of crouched over, you've got the long legs going, you've got a helmet on that resembles a dome. It's fair enough. The result of this research was that they did find a correlation, not necessarily causation, a correlation between those who tended towards cyclists more on the cockroach side reported more aggressive behaviour towards cyclists in the form of deliberately passing too close, deliberately cutting them off, all kinds of terrible things you can imagine cars do to cyclists. So it's an interesting idea, and I think it's very interesting research, and I'm glad it was popular. But one of the things that came out of it, not so much in the article, but in the interviews with the authors later, I think the journalists drew them out on this, was they suggested in the article, the authors, that there was a way to maybe, there's scope to rehumanise or humanise cyclists so that there isn't so much aggressive behaviour towards them, if indeed there is a causation between the two. And it got to the point where they talked about maybe not using the word cyclist, actually using the word human rider. Maybe, I don't know, I could be making that up. Anyway, the debate kind of degenerated at that point, and I think there's not really anything useful to come out of that. It was just speculation. But nevertheless, I wanted to talk about this because it's interesting thinking about the debate about how to get a more mutual respect on the roads. In particular, how to get cars to not behave aggressively towards bikes. But I think there's really no point in talking about how to rehumanise or humanise cyclists on the road. I actually think that's a symptom of a much larger problem. Namely, the problem that any kind of minority group faces in a high-pressure, tense environment. So I'll come back and I'll take you to that in just a moment. But what I want to start with here is personal experience first. Now, I experience aggression on the roads. It's seasonal for me in Hobart. It lasts about 11 months of the year. There's a brief break between Christmas and, let's say, the beginning to mid-February. I often forget, January is such a wonderful time. It's summer here in the Southern Hemisphere, so it's a beautiful time. A lovely time in Hobart. And I just swim through the streets, unabused and unhonked, if such a word exists. And I mean, it's not rocket science why that happens. So the reason why that happens is because it's school holidays, so there's fewer cars on the road, there's less congestion. Come February, everything just clogs up again. Okay, so before I talk about the underlying factors behind that, I'm just going to use probably a rather obscure reference just to talk about that. And that's coming from everywhere today. There's a book by a guy called Viktor Frankl. It's called Man's Search for Meaning. It's a tremendous book. It's on just about every top 10 reading list, I suspect, and for good reason. Viktor Frankl was a prisoner in the concentration camps, various concentration camps, in Nazi Germany during the Second World War. He was also, I think, a psychoanalyst, and he was heavily involved in a school of psychoanalysis called logotherapy, and his book discusses his experiences in concentration camps with respect to his philosophy on how to find meaning in life. Now, on the very last page of the book, Viktor Frankl quotes or summarizes something that Sigmund Freud said. Freud said that if you take, hypothetically, if you take a diverse group of people and you put them in a situation where there's an external environment, external ailment that's pressing on them, and he used the example of hunger, the differences between that diverse group will blur. Now, Frankl disagreed with this because he actually lived this experience. He lived, it was an extraordinary thing. He lived through the concentration camps, and he was in that high pressure environment, arguably the most difficult environment, I'd say, in the 20th century. And he says that rather than the differences blurring between people, those differences sharpen. Just hang on there, Chief. Thanks, buddy. So they became more pronounced, and people went towards a sliding scale of being either swine or saints. Those are his words. Now, there's nothing particularly revolutionary about that. You can see it when an economy tanks or takes a downturn. All those prejudices that were kept under the surface by prosperity, they start to come to the floor as people have grievances that they can't voice, and they start to go after the minority groups. And I would argue that the same is true when congestion reaches beyond a certain point in the traffic. Anger pushes towards the minority groups, which in Hobart and maybe I'd say the rest of Australia at least is cyclists. Now, what's my point here? My point is, I don't believe there's any cure for dehumanisation or trying to maintain high levels of humanisation for cyclists. It depends on the environment. Cyclists, we're always going to be different. We're a different beast on the road. We've got two wheels, we're much smaller, physically powered. You could make a strong case, I think, that being in a car is in fact more dehumanising than being on a bike, because you're in this shell, and I can't see who's in the car most of the time. They're completely anonymous and dehumanised to me. When the autonomous cars arrive, I'll be hard pressed to pick them from the driver cars. But the thing is, that doesn't matter, because cars are the dominant species on the road. They're the in-group, if you like. And everybody knows what it's like to drive a car. Most of us drive a car. So we would never consider them to be dehumanised machines, I think. So as long as cyclists are the minority, then the frustration and the invectives, like Cockroach is, dude, that's my lane, will continue to come back. So the problem is, and I have no solution for this whatsoever, to be honest, I kind of enjoy it, and that's congestion. And that's the root cause. All right, that's it. Thanks again for watching, and I will see you next time.